From the Struggle to God Files 2004. How did the Bible get into our hands? Struggle to God. It is late night, and there is a young man who is driving approaching the home, which comes to a soft stop in his modest automobile in front of the home of an elderly author by the name of Nathaniel Freeman. This young man is a controversial speaker and author. This man is one who is hunted by forces seen and unseen. He has a desire for God that is non-explainable and a hate for Satan that he makes known to his world. Some call him a minister, a revolutionary, a demagogue, an enemy of the church and God himself, a man of desolation, or even a nomad. He knows that his days are numbered because of the environment and what surrounds him. He is feared because he is looked upon as dangerous, because he has no fear in him, because of one who was before him, looked upon as dangerous, who overcame his fear in the Garden of Gethsemane. He is born for this time, but he is an ancient spirit. He is technically uneducated in the system, but taught by God. He is wise. He is intelligent. He is radical and ruthless. He is not patriotic, a countryman. He is receptive and opinionated. He is assertive but reserved. He is apologetic when he is wrong. He is not afraid to die because he is not afraid to live. He is a man, yet he is a child who needs to be held. He is a man of war because he loves peace. He is physically mysterious and imposingly intimidating. His eyes have no morality of good or evil, yet they are full of life and curiosity. He is wounded. He is sensitive. He is cold and barren. He is a friend to the Muslim, the true Jew, and the wounded and misunderstood Nazi. He is kind. He is courteous. He is gentle. He is humble. He is full of love, hate, fire, and spirit. He is compassionate. He is angry and disappointed at the world. He is good. He is evil. He is insidious. He is secretive and reclusive. He is outspoken but silently observant. He is harmless. He is violent in many forms. He is consistently inconsistent. Thus he is complicated to determine because he remains dedicated to spiritual growth. He attracts attention but does not want attention. His motives are not hinted because he shows no signs of aggression or interest. His thinking and where his mind concludes are not seen before revealed. Therefore he is seductive because he is looked upon as eccentric. He is known but unknown. He would go to hell to save those who hate him. He would die for a stranger to him. All of these gifts and flaws are disciplined into an uncriminalistic man because of a wisdom and intellect imbued in him by God. Thus he is in control due to being controlled. Truth places in all of us these characteristics when we are being made free. He enters the dim lighted home, removing his brim for to respect the home. He is a strikingly handsome young man with a strange feminine beauty to his appearance. Thin-framed, thin, straight but curly dark brown hair. An odd reddish light brown mysterious complexion because his ethnicity is a mystery. He wears a long black overcoat covering a dark colored suit. He was seen as a man of all nations. As he enters the home, he gently smiles and shakes the hand of the author's wife Helen. As she greets him, he sits down in an old dark brown comforter by a fireplace, within it a gentle flame flickering. He is served coffee, and as he slowly sips his coffee, he begins to talk. Brother Nathaniel. This was a letter written to President William McKinley in October in 1899 that the Massachusetts of Colored National League wrote. We have suffered, sir. God knows how much we have suffered since your accession to office at the hands of a country professing to be Christian, but which is not Christian, from the hate and violence from a people claiming to be civilized, but who are not civilized. And you have seen our sufferings witnessed by your high place, our awful wrongs and miseries, and you have in no time, and on no occasion, opened your lips on our behalf. Why, we ask, is it because we are black and weak and despised? Are you silent because without any fault of our own, and were enslaved and held for more than 2 centuries in cruel bondage by your forefathers? Is it because we bear the mark of those sad generations of Anglo-Saxon brutality and wickedness that you do not speak? There was no response from the politician as this day and time. It was not as this all the time. What has to be understood first is that slavery was a business within the common functions of the current cultural design at the time, not a racially based institution. Slavery is still a business. It is called corporate America. Slavery is people breeding, living, dying, stealing, lying, and murdering. You must stay focused on what I am telling you, so that you will understand what is being given to you and how we have been manipulated, and also how the Spirit of truth has reached us through our personal and collective journey. You will understand our present condition and position as people of God and what must be done and understood as what it will take for the sake of either resolving these matters or of suffering the plight of self-destruction. The Mayflower. She came out of a violent storm, they say, with a story no one believed then, because of a shocking reality that revealed in the human family a never-before-known lust for power and control. The Mayflower, a name no one recorded and a past that no one investigated objectively. She was asserted to have been manned by pirates and thieves from the Western world, like those we know this day in Washington, D.C. She came 113 years before the birth of George Washington and 244 years before the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. This ship sailed into the harbor of Jamestown, Virginia, and dropped its anchor into the muddy waters of history. She contained Africans that she forced from a Spanish vessel that was on its way to the West Indies to be sold. She stopped in Jamestown, it was said, because it was the first English settlement in America, the Beautiful. The captain, John Rolfe, noted that he was in great need of food and was willing to trade cargo for it. It transpired. Anthony, Isabella's, Pedro, and 17 other Africans walked upon the shore of this very soil in 1619, and the history of slavery in America began. In 1623 or 1624, Isabella gave birth to the first black child born in English America, and a child under the name of William was baptized in the Church of England. A child, an innocent child, mind you, of a slave mother who was baptized by Christians, yet became a slave because the mother was a slave. This is not Christian, because if the mother was a slave at the time of the birth of that child, then that child also was deemed a slave. An innocent child born into the world a slave in a Christian country. All have been affected. After a time, there were thousands of ships that came after the Mayflower carrying cargo of slaves, pirated by men whom claimed Christian. The European slave trade started in 1444. As I said in the formal, slavery was old when Moses was young. In Plato's Athens and Caesar's Rome, humans, white, black, and brown, were bought and sold. Slavery existed in the Middle Ages in Christian Europe and in Africa and of African culture. The reports are everyone had slaves among their ancestors. In the ancient world, it is said that anyone would be subject to becoming a slave because it had little or nothing to do with race. It was wealth and therefore power. From an honest and fair vantage point, slavery was not a disgrace particularly to only Africans, but a universal phenomenon that has been practiced in almost all countries and their cultures. We have all been affected, but we have some black people who will purposely reject and deny this reality in order to justify their hate towards other Europeans who had no part in it, but are victims of it as well. There is a crucial difference between ancient slavery and modern slavery. Ancient slavery, as was said, had little or nothing to do with race, but was justified primarily by the rules of war, which cultivated wealth and power to particular families and institutions, whose wars, Christians and Muslims, or as they called them back then, Muslims. So now Islam was advocating slavery, as others were. They added a new dimension to this ancient institution. They captured and enslaved one another for religious reasons and purposes, the same as this day in Arab Palestine, or of how Malcolm X used to try and fish for potential Muslims outside a Christian church. The same rationale served both groups when economic interests and modernized technology focused world attention on Africa because of her natural resources, including the natural resource in terms of human beings. The Muslims got there firstly, before the European Christian managed to. From studies, because of the hot Sahara sands was preventing the Europeans from safe travels. The European could not withstand it because of being from a colder climate, as well as not having the knowledge of knowing of how to survive in the desert climate, and was reported had a limited knowledge of the desert sands, concerning the sand hills as a navigator. Before the European slave trade, Muslim merchants took Africans across the Sahara Desert. Then in the 15th century, Portugal diverted this trade to the Atlantic with the blessings of the Pope of Rome. Within 10 years' time, Portugal was importing 10,000 Africans a year because of the demand for black domestic and labor-related servants. Soon the blacks outnumbered the white in sections of Portugal, resulting in Negroid physical characteristics in the features in the Portuguese nation. The so-called pious Portuguese saw no wrong in what was transpiring. They baptized the captives and then enslaved them. They were Christians, not all were slaves. Out of Europe, places as France and London, there were Africans who came to America and other countries who were not slaves. This is why I said they were not forced or dragged to come. They were explorers, but they were the descendants of slaves. They gained this position by being made Christians from their youth. They were, as I said, made Christian. They did not become Christians through a conscious choice. These were, as they called them, the good Negroes, as if they were well-trained dogs, no more willing to be free-minded. But if they could see their own people enslaved, and at the same so-called knowing the truth of God, then how could they participate? Because slavery was a business. It was then a common institution to them also to perceive other underprivileged human beings as expendable because of their economic status. Thus, they were brainwashed in their youth, even upon an intellectual, regarding the level of economics of common humanity, or just humanity alone. They could not see and therefore perceive anything because they were blinded by lies of human enslavement. For if you were not a good Christian, you were subject to being a slave or a servant. As if there is a vast difference in the two, that much they failed to know. Therefore, those who were slaves was looked upon by their own as uncivil heathens, regardless of the so-called civilized knowing of how they got into that condition. The same as today of how the church judges and condemns anyone who is not Christian, when Jesus never said that he was one. It was disguised, as it is this day, mental and spiritual bondage, so they were the true slaves. Their chains, their flintlocks were just on their mind and intellect, and not on their wrists and ankles. Think of the Hitler Youth, or Bush's last State of the Union address. In the movie Amistad, you noticed that Morgan Freeman and the other black actor had roots in the slaves that were stolen from Africa by the Spaniards. One even could speak their language and help represent them in court procedures to obtain again their freedom. Reflect upon the character Fiddler in the movie Roots. He was a descendant of the same African that he called, in a mocking manner, a Ginny Man. The most important of these events were the Europeans' discovery of America through Spain in 1492 and the opening of the New World. It is a point of paradoxical interest that the descendants of the first black captives, who were with the European settlers and explorers, were black Christians born in Spain and Portugal. They were explorers, slaves, and servants, and free men in a sense. They accompanied Spain and Portugal in the explorations of North and South America for the slave trade institution, giving it a new meaning and function. They were with Pizarro in Peru, Cortez in Mexico, and Manens in Florida. 30 blacks were with Balboa when he discovered the Pacific Ocean. I studied Balboa up in my aunt's attic when I was 12 years old. No Indians. Spaniards who took the lead in the exploration of the New World attempted first to enslave the Indians, but the Spaniards died so fast in large numbers trying to fight the Indians. It was staggering. The Indians that were caught and enslaved. The white rulers of the colonies saw and began to believe that Indians tend to sicken and die under the conditions of slavery. Then after a short time, a man by the name of Bishop Bartolomé Las Casas, who was a famous missionary in that time, had recommended in the year 1517 the importation of Africans for the immense manual labor, a recommendation that he would later live to regret. He was a Christian. The Spaniards said the African was strong and asserted that one African was worth 4 Indians. And also they were a good investment because they said that Africans could run away because they could not blend into any white environment if they attempted so. The development of large-scale sugar planting created a demand for men that casual kidnapping could not supply. During the sudden wake of that, monarchs shifted and the European-African dialogue shifted. It became a monologue focused exclusively on the trade of men and women. Within a few years, hundreds of thousands of blacks were crossing the Atlantic each year, and the soil of Africa and America was drenched with their blood. Imagine, said an author by the name of Eric Williams. An article like sugar, so sweet and necessary to human existence, should have occasioned such brutal crimes against humanity. I am going to move ahead a little more, but I will give you a summary that I need to express so that you will not get confused on where this is going. Remember earlier in this, I told you of the first black settlers, Anthony, Isabella, and the Jamestown group. They had came in the same way that the first white immigrants came, under duress and pressure. Why and how? The Europeans founded a system, indentured servitude, which enabled poor whites to come to America to sell their services for a stipulated number of years to planters, to work off their records of crimes against humanity committed in Europe. Under this system, thousands of whites, paupers, religious dissenters, waifs, prisoners and prostitutes were shipped to the colonies and were sold to the highest bidder. Many of them were sold, the same as pirates and captains of ships sold the Africans. Sending these whites to America was a plan that many high-status Europeans were against. One was Benjamin Franklin. Some Europeans were even kidnapped right off of the streets of London and Bristol, as the first black brothers and sisters were kidnapped from the villages of Africa. There were also some Africans with no criminal records that were volunteers to this system to gain their freedom after they came to America from England and France. This was done by them to gain document proof of their freedom. This to me was still, without trying to sound defiant, slavery, even though it was not as cruel as what has been demonstrated, in which gave slavery such a demonic identity. After 1619, you were free, yet in bondage under a working contract, like a job application for parole time. It was, as it is today, a form of economic oppression, which serves the mindset of a state of equality, if one can manage to meet a specific level of intellect, a time of when you have to work in the system until you are free. This American corporate system is designed to keep you in it by its limited educational system and disencouraging standard wages, only giving one so much to be successful within it for its strength. Slavery. However, the common, less educated occupants keep this machine functioning under the 5% who rule it with their dictating iron fists. Corn and cotton fields, or a Roman ship with the human slaves below pulling the paddles to the beat of Roman's drum, so that the ship can function as one machine towards that one cause and objective, asserted to be of a noble principle. The only way to freedom, as one will in time come to realize, is to establish some form of original creativity, which this system cannot relate to, but use for its growth, thus places it at your allegiance because of your gifts. Okay, I strayed off, but this reminds me of something very crucial, the breaking apart. In the 60s of the 17th century, the men who ran the colonies, encouraged by slave trade royalists in London, made a decision that would lead step by step to the faithful 60s of the 19th century and the faithful 60s of the 20th century. Heedless to the effective consequences, these men decided to base the American economic system on human slavery, as was the Pharaoh's intention of Egypt. It began in Virginia and Maryland when they passed policies that forbade intermarriage, and the blacks were no longer in servitude, but were suddenly made slaves for the rest of their lives. This is when the Bond or Free Act cultivated and went into activation, particularly towards blacks. This caused a great division between blacks and whites, and in time in effect caused a serious invisible political impediment between us as a people under one God. We came apart in the 1660s. Isn't that strange? Racial turmoil in every century in the 60s. We came apart. White America and Black America, and it caused a great discomfort and paranoia in both creeds. Thus, white America, finding itself on the other side of that divide, found it almost immediately to take two necessary steps to ensure social civilization because of the past sending through their minds and heart a fear-fed guilt. The first was a creation of an ideology that justified the subordination of blacks upon a moral basis. Second, to cause the destruction of the bonds of community between black and white servants who constituted the majority of the population. Who was responsible for this? The planters, the aristocrats, the parsons, the lawyers, and the founding fathers. You know, the good people. In doing this, they achieved just the opposite between us. They did nothing but sow the seeds of a bitter harvest, as the author Laron Bennett said. How would they accomplish this legally and morally? Do they legalize it first, or do they moralize it first? This is important. 2 Peter 2nd chapter. Rationalization of church and then state. The first step to rationalization was religion, and the one chosen was the one chosen centuries before that is the most conventional upon the planet Earth, Christianity. A religion that you can use any way that you desire. They needed a reason to justify having slaves. So Africans, it was asserted, were good material for slavery because they were looked upon as heathens, considering their unjust lot. This was but obvious to just about anyone due to their limitations, and the limitations of this ideology against them as human beings. Their so-called heathenism condition was not a permanent condition, they suddenly thought. They could be made Christians as easily as they were made slaves, because the religion is interchangeable with being a slave. Since there were already many other black immigrants that were already Christians, and many more of them became Christians in the colonies up under the whip, and submitted to be Christians under the servitude system. So they became Christians under a decadent world. So if there were any true disciples after 64 AD, in the times of Nero and so forth, those who were enslaved, who were considered heathens, were, there was an old folk song sung by the night fire in the steady wind by the slaves, when they would congregate in the woods, under the moon that went as this brother. Negroes show the image of the good God to the white man, that we thirst not. Good God grant us the freedom which speaks to all men, O Lord. The famous Creole player bombed you the ideology. The planters, aristocrats, and ideologists set forth to find a more enduring mark, one that could not be changed morally, because politically it could be dissolved regarding the right circumstances as any other policies under sieges. But before this could be accomplished, there was one critical issue which had to be cleared up on the basis of theological difficulties. If this is going to be made just in the eyes of common humanity, was it a sin to have slaves being a Christian? Was it a sin to baptize slaves if you did have them? This question caused a hot and passionate debate. I would think of how blind they were of why this was even a question in their wicked minds. The scriptures were searched to and fro to support this issue. Exhausted, because there was nothing to support slavery or even the indentured servitude system under divinity. Under divinity, there is no contract. There is just forgiveness. The Bible speaks against oppression and slavery in the case of the Hebrews as many other circumstances because of God's dismantlement of it. And so did Jesus speak against it, of mental and spiritual oppression and slavery, when he told us, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make us free." But when man deems something or someone as evil, then you end up with the following hypocrisy, in which was the ideology that was used to justify them having slaves and being Christians. Finally, to the surprise of none of them, it was decided upon the mentality of the missionary backed by the Vatican, that it was a Christian duty obligation to bring heathens into the fold of Christian civilization so that their souls could be cleansed and whitened. Thus, in the end, the hypocrites asserted God and prophets were reconciled, as Virginia noted in its law in 1660, cleansed of any other religion or culture as Islam, and whitened regarding the European westernizing of their personalities. The bourgeois, the desired social personality. The bougies were their greatest vice weapon against the slave because they were already made Christian. Thus, being the whitened bougie had become a common law regarding the acceptance of civilization, regarding the common personality. I call them vice weapons because the vice was the influence regarding them being the example to the slave of what to be. Thus, this personality was as a vice upon the mind. Weapon meaning that this was a personality that would ensure peace and cooperation from the slaves in the presence of the slave masters if they submitted to this false sense of self, personality, and thus pacification or westernization. You see this today everywhere, especially in Hollywood, and what is most accepted in Hollywood and media regarding good exposure, gaining overall respect. So this caused the slaves to look upon the bougie because of the effect of their hardship as the example of freedom, as the bougie looked upon the master because of his freedom. So there was a molding process into Western ethnicity and culture. Thus, the adaptation to Western Christianity and culture carried freedom. The bougie has never realized, as today, that he was the worst slave created. He would in time come to understand this when revolution began, when he suddenly found the sword about his throat as he was awakened from his night's rest, and an enraged black slave who refused to adapt to a Western philosophy of life, with tears in his eyes, looking the bougie in his eyes, set in his mind to set him eternally free, telling him, yes, you too. He would suddenly come to realize that everything was taken from him internally, when he thought everything was given to him externally. as a puppet manipulated by the strings of his master in a sideshow, or a parrot in a cage speaking the ideology of the master. He had this false sense of self-respect, integrity, and identity because he was man-made, fashioned by decadency, not made by God, but a hawk casting a dark shadow over those whom they deemed as heathenism. He should have known this as a Christian by the way he was taught to look down upon those who were made slaves and deemed as heathens by heathenism acts against his own people, against the humanity of God. New York, 1956. Uncle Tom has always been stripped of everything except his Bible. J.C. Furness. These series of social laws, seen and unseen, stripped blacks of all rights of their own personalities and made the color of the skin a badge of servitude, morally and politically. And when you strip a person or people of their personalities, you rob them of their own sense of identity. Thus they are never able to express themselves honestly. It is as you are to be as we are, but you will never live as we live. This was a heathenist act against humanity by Christians. Not much has changed today. Since when and where did Jesus see slavery as a just act? Wouldn't you think that the Hebrews would still be in Egypt? Where in the word is there such a thing as liberation into oppression upon demotion of human substance? So what is told to the world in this travesty is that the gospel of Christ does not advocate slavery and mental oppression, but the religion of Christianity does. The question of slave and Christian. The baptism does not change the condition of that person, nor does baptism justify his condition in the sight of God. But as a Christian, the slave remains a slave. How can you graduate a human being whom you call a heathen into Christian civilization through baptism, that you claim makes the heathen civilized under the cloak of Christendom, and still leave them a slave, still claiming them as uncivil? Then who is the real heathen? Baptism is to free us from past heathenish thinking and actions, not to consecrate bondage of any man or women. The entire issue has to be morally justified in order for the people to see this as a just act politically. Through this manipulation to the public's minds, it all goes in harmony and causes unfair and improper judgment of people who are seen different because of religion or creed. There it is. You have Hitler and the Nazi Party, Dr. William Pierce of the National Alliance, the Ku Klux Klan, Maury Stokes and his eugenics, Darwinism and his racial hygiene, and it goes on and on and on. And they all claim Christians. Think of Hitler and Pope Pius XII, Napoleon, and the Pope of Rome, Mussolini and the Pope of Rome. The Pope preying on military missiles before they were dropped upon Ethiopia, killing men, women and children, and leaving Ethiopia impoverished until this day. If they remain a heathen in the eyes of the good people after the baptism has been performed to the degree that they will remain slaves, then what was all of this for? Rituals and hypocrisy and lies. And those descendants who were made Christians and slaves passed this common Western religion down. And suddenly one day, a Bible was placed in your hand because you were seen to have been doing acts that were looked upon as heathenish. Remember, there was a socio-economic groove in Virginia that carried no implications of racial superiority or inferiority. That later came. But for 40 years, the first black settlers accumulated land, voted, testified in court, and mingled with whites on the basis of equality. Thus, there was a balance of wealth and education, and a harmonious respect for one another. Does blood and ethnicity makes us brothers and sisters, or does circumstances based upon principle? Let's go back for a second. The good servants. There were also blacks and whites that held other blacks and whites under this system of indentured servitude. They even paid for some that they had owned in Europe to be shipped to America. Think for a second. This is a system in which imbues within the individual no level of common humanity, according to the standards of Christ. But these people said they were Christians. It was and is a government system that is made corporate in Christian corporate America. I am still in the 1600s. The state of Virginia's population was swelling massively in blacks by natural addition and importation during the 1600s. In 1621, the James arrived with a number of immigrants, including a black man by the name of Antonio. In 1623, the ship titled The Swan arrived with still another black man from England by the name John Pedro, and so on. In the 1630s and 1640s, 160 blacks were imported from Africa off of a Portuguese slave ship. In 1649, colonial officials were able to report that there are in Virginia about 15,000 English, and of the Negroes brought thither 300 good servants. The good servants came from different backgrounds with different experiences, from England, Spain, and Portugal, and the West Indies. But what made them to be looked upon as good servants? They were Christians baptized in these places, and also on the high seas before they made it to land in case of a thought of retaliation. Suddenly a rhythm changes. In 1723, blacks were not permitted to vote in Virginia anymore because of their rise to power in economics and the political arena. Blacks voted in South Carolina until the year 1701, in North Carolina until 1715, and in Georgia until 1754. Not only did pioneer blacks vote, but also they held strong public office. Open oppression and prejudice had begun in America through a new corporate system stimulated by prejudice. If you want to stop a people from rising in the system, fearing that they will soon control it and have a total recall, then you must take away their common rights within that system that ensures them status growth by changing the system now depriving them of their civil rights, thus human rights. As a flower or tree has their right to sun and water. Revolts in America. There were reported 250 revolts and conspiracies in America during the slave era. The revolt accrued in a settlement of some 500 Spaniards and 100 slaves on the Petty River in contemporary South Carolina. It was 2,000 Africans with 5,000 Indians. The Spaniard was so overwhelmed by the resistance, they left and went back to Haiti and Spain. With the arrival of the first English settlers 81 years later, Africans and Indians fighting together and sometimes separate mounted a campaign against oppression which grew to great force and department. There was an African Indian uprising in Hartford, Connecticut in 1657. In 1690, there was a panic in Newbury, Massachusetts of revolution. In 1708, in Queens, New York, there was an Indian slave and a black woman who murdered their master, his wife, and their 5 children. There was a violent revolt in 1712 in New York City that caused many deaths. It was a band of black warriors with marginal Indians. These revolts continued until the year 1791. Why? How did they stop the people from revolting? During the revolt, the southern idol churches were being burned down after they were built up in 1648 to keep them under control, thus surveillance. Why? The whites were troubled because they did not convert any black preachers out of their revivals. Our revivals produced no preachers. Churches are like the buildings that they worship. Gone in a few years. Revival. There was no more hope for any good servants because the people were tired of being oppressed. Suddenly, they woke up after they understood what oppression was. They had come to understand that when you are born into oppression, you do not recognize it as oppression, but a way of life. Of course, until someone with years of experience before you wakes you up with the facts. No more misinformation of someone having them looking up, dancing on cotton candy clouds, or telling them that God would liberate them after their physical deaths, while the rest of the world was beating them down into the dust and wet soil, killing any level of self-respect or integrity that they had left within. Yes, because of the revolts, sugar fields, tobacco and coffee fields burned to ashes, and nothing was left in order to put the fields out, leaving no means for the preservation of their economic status and continued growth. There, that is your revival they demonstrate. The people who were looked upon as not good servants were suddenly given a book that was denied to them for 300 years. The Bible. They knew that if the slave were to become educated, they would understand that what was being done to them, what was done to them, was wrong in the sight of God. As I said before, they suddenly, through Christian scholars, did not see that it was incompatible for them to be slaves and Christians, not because and from the gospel of Jesus, but from the standpoint of how to use religion to come into the very nature of them, and deceive them in their very nature of their love for God. The revolt ended with the tool, the Bible, and the effects therein were pacification, not civilization, because unjust brutality increased against them from the very people who placed the Bible in their hand, and also through those who was their same ethnicity. When you are a little too free, too full of fire, because you are willing to speak against wickedness by your God-given instinct of knowing what is right, they give you a Bible or tell you to go to church, you are calmer. But your condition is the same, if not worse, because of any movement, because Christianity does not inspire movement, yet Jesus and the gospel does. But now you allow the world to abuse you not because of what you believe, but what you are taught to believe. And your actions are sold based upon what you believe inside. You have heard it before, or maybe have even said it in criticism of someone's uncivil words or actions. You need to go to church. Instead of telling them, pray to God for guidance and strength. Spirit, still waters. Shaka Zulu was pacified and manipulated with the religion Christianity, as well as Geronimo's people were, and many all over the world, since the days of Constantine of Rome. And this day and time it is happening in Iraq and Turkey. The worst kind of human being is one who has been wrong based upon the standards of morality, and the enemy knows this. The justice system does not penetrate them because they feel victimized by the system, and their belief and dedication to God supersedes common law and also fear. Thus they revolt against what they feel is oppressing them. To stop them, you must first kill the zeal within the idea. It must be watered down and compromised for it to lose its real internal effect and influential motivation. Shaka Zulu was on his way to liberating South Africa, Cape Town, from the English and the Irish who were there, but was internally intercepted with the Bible and then destroyed upon the basis of self-destruction. The Jews rewrote German history and took the German pride and sternness out of the German identity and character. Thus the people who read it became passive because they submitted to what was written. Thus when World War I came to dawn, they were slaughtered in the field of war. This is why I tell many that the Bible is not holy. It is a book containing some of the scriptures of God, and even those have been tampered with, fondled, molested, violated, made impure, and unsure, thus unholy and ineffective. Why this was given? This was all given to you because you must search back and be honest with yourself about how you came to know who Jesus is, or even if you truly know who he is in defiance of what has been taught to you through the years inside of the church institution. You must also remember that all that transpired. Know that the Pope and the Vatican knew about the activities of slavery and gave it their blessing to proceed into a market of human trafficking. On May 15th, 1518, 100 years before the Jamestown landing, Henry of the Congo led a mission to the Vatican, formally addressed the Pope in Latin, and was appointed Bishop of the Congo. In Rome, Lisbon, and other European centers, Africans rose to high positions in church and state, as did Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson. However, after Dr. Martin Luther King woke up, he was killed by this same government system who once supported his efforts. It has seemed for a spell that Christianity would have the same fertilizing effect in Africa in the 16th century that Islam had in the 11th and 12th century. But it was not so. The business of slavery would divert all of that, but would be justified by both religions. No oil was poured into their wounds. Being born into this country that says that we have freedom of religion. However, this is a Christian nation by default. This means that your religion has already been chosen for you, initially without your consent, as coming into this world not having any input if we wanted to live in it or not. And this particular religion was used to control and place you in mental bondage, when your instinctive nature from the truth of God speaks to your heart and mind otherwise. It has no culture and no rules outside some of the divine principles of God, and therefore, without culture, there is not practice of proper living nor standards of behavior. This is why there is no respect or obedience in the dress code, because it has none. They wear to church the same of what they wear to the club or to the hotel or slot machine. Of course, bearing a different walk and demeanor because of the occasion. You would think that out of their love for God and Christ, these women and young women and girls would dress according to how much they claim to love and respect the Father and therefore themselves, if indeed that is what they are going there for. You would think that the so-called Mothers Board would teach them better. You would think that the pastor would tell the Mothers Board to encourage the proper feminine nature of the woman to be manifested in them, but that would cause them to cover up. You would think that the deacons would teach the young men better. If there was never anything in the book in which said anything about the way that Jesus dressed, then he dressed in a manner that was modest, so modest that it did not attract the wrong attention. But those who have no suits and ties, no pretty flower dresses, who only have cloths that could be compared to John the Baptist. As rags or in the modern not accepted in the church because of not fitting the traditional dictated dress code. No freedom. They in their sick minds are no different than those who mocked and scorned Brother John for his dress. The first black and white settlers knew the word, but did they move in the spirit to end oppression? No, Jesus says, the kingdom of God is within you. So greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. We are all family. There have been whites who have suffered. They have been mocked, scorned, and even killed for the color of their skin, as well as our people, for the color of their skin. How is this? They were being killed by those who revolted against an oppression that was not of their causing, and also by other whites who killed them for their compassion for what was right, because of the wrong that was being done to others outside of their race against humanity. Most have profited from slavery, but it does not mean that those who have profited because of what their forefathers did agree and advocate what their forefathers did in the past. Africans as well as Europeans were involved in the slave trade. There was only one attempt to bring it to a halt other than violent revolution in the year 1526 from Mani Congo, the ruler of the Congo state. He tried to end it in a letter written to John III of Portugal, telling him that all that they needed for their land was teachers, priests, and no other goods but flour and wine for their holy sacraments. He tried to tell him not to send any more merchants and wares because they felt that they did not need nor want any slave trading in their land. But as the politician, President William McKinley, Europe was impervious to such pleas of peace. They were only interested in the gold of black bodies and forced that obsession on Africa because of their insatiable urge for human flesh and the undoing of both Africa and Europe. Some even this day hold within a fear-fed guilt when they were not guilty of anything, but they do need to know of how their people fought over this trade for years, shedding their own blood, the same as Bush has them, black and white fighting over oil and other natural resources. And the terrorist calls it a war on terrorism when it is truly the oil trade. American history regarding her historians and even Hollywood has served an unjust to all of us about all of this, and have through the media of this shifted the blame upon one nation of people, causing a great hate for whites, and some whites feeling a natural responsibility to demonstrate hate against blacks and other nations, rather they intend to or not, when all were responsible. Don't you think that the government would have known of this kind of effect? I believe they did. Hate creates jobs, and it is wrong of us to cause them to feel guilty, when so many of them this day do not hate blacks even if a black person takes the life of someone whom they love. Only if they see of what their forefathers did was just makes them guilty. We must understand that emotions contain no intellect, but we sometimes are led by them if we allow them to do our thinking for us. Emotions feel, but they do not think. Social spiritual democracy. I feel that if we will open up our hearts and minds and accept the reality that slavery affected us all over the world, then we would come together upon that common stimulant and accept God in honesty. The hurt and blindness would cease, and the real enemy will be revealed. Racism, slavery, and other political corruption are mindsets and cannot be attached to any particular race of people. We have all suffered, thus no matter of the ethnicity. Jesus said that the kingdom of God is within us. Truth has to be written upon our hearts and minds, and it takes honest prayer and dedication to be worthy of the divine spirit of truth. Greater is he that is in you than in the world. The kingdom is within, written by David Anthony Brayboy.